16th, 2024 City Council meeting. If the clerk can call the roll.
Of course. Councilmember Lithcott-Haynes.
Here.
Councilmember Vinker.
Here remotely.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Here.
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lowing.
Here.
Mayor Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Koo.
Here.
For the record, all present.
Mayor Stone, I'm told I should make a statement at the beginning. Is now the time about my remote participation? Is now the time you'd like that?
This time would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm invoking the just cause provision of AB 2449, where I can attend remotely because I am out of town on travel while on business of a local agency. Specifically, I am attending the Northern California Power Association meeting in Sacramento, having been recently appointed as the Palo Alto's commissioner. There are no adults 18 or older in the room with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Vinker. We'll move to item 2, agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Great, seeing none, thank you. And now we'll move to item 3, public comment for anything that is not on the agenda. How many speaker cards do we have, Madam Clerk?
We currently have 9 requests to speak.
Okay. Is that a 10th one that was just added? Okay, great. With 9 speakers, we'll go 3 minutes.
Our first speaker is Sarah B.
Good evening. Dear Palo Alto City Council members. I wanted first to congratulate you on a wonderful 2024. Hopefully it's going to be peaceful and prosperous for everyone. I'd like to also thank the council members for all the work that you're doing to keep our community united and not divided. We thank you also for not considering a ceasefire resolution. I would like to read a paragraph from dear colleague letter sent by the Legislative Jewish Caucus to the entire legislature last week, which relates to the resolutions. And here is the paragraph. So this toxic hate directed towards our community has seeped into our public discourse and political process, up to and including fatal violence directed towards a Jewish person at a protest. Local resolutions on the Israel-Hamas war, most notably in Oakland and Long Beach, have provided a platform for bigots to express hateful conspiracy theories and extreme anti-Jewish vitriol. Anti-Israel protesters literally shut down the California Democratic Party convention after they were unable to achieve their aims through reasoned argument or the political process. So I just want to thank you again for all of your work and to keep supporting our joint community together. Thank you. Say no to ceasefire resolutions.
Our next speaker is Jessica K.
Hello again, council members. It's good to see you, and you will see me each week until a resolution is put on the agenda and passed. On October 21st, 2023, this council adopted a proclamation condemning the October 7th attack by Hamas, establishing a precedent of addressing international issues. This proclamation detailed the number of settlers who had been killed while only vaguely addressing that some Palestinian civilians had died as well, despite the fact that the number of murdered Palestinian civilians had already surpassed the number of settlers who had been killed at that point. This is bias at work. What's more, your council named Hamas as directly responsible for Palestinian deaths, removing all responsibility from both Israel's 75 years of occupation and the occupation force's indiscriminate bombing that has resulted in a higher civilian loss than in any other modern war or conflict. Why is it that this council is prepared to denounce the great loss of 1,300 settlers, but not the great loss of 30,000 Palestinians? And how is it that calling for a ceasefire has become the controversial position? We have crossed 100 days of genocide. How many Palestinians must be massacred before you call for a ceasefire? We will remember your silence, and when I teach the genocide of Palestine to your children in 10 years, you can be sure that I will be teaching of your silence in particular. Lastly, I want to express that this is a local issue that this council must address. The U.S. representatives at the UN continue to veto ceasefire resolutions brought before the Security Council, despite the fact that 61% of Americans support a ceasefire. When the federal government refuses to heed the will of the people, it is up to local and state governments to speak for us. When the federal government won't call for a ceasefire, local government must. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Andrea G.
Hi, I'm speaking tonight as a member of 350 Palo Alto. I'd like to start by congratulating our new mayor, Mayor Greerstone, and I want to thank him for his dedication to young people, both as a teacher and also with his recent announcement that he's going to be putting a special focus on youth mental health. Researchers are finding that one big stressor for young people today is climate anxiety, and we hear that firsthand from the high schoolers who work in our own organization. A study published last year of 10,000 young people around the world found that 59% were very or extremely worried about climate change. 45% said that their anxiety affected daily life and functioning. This is just one of many studies that have found the toll that climate change anxiety is taken. I want to read from one that was published in Nature last year. Distress about climate change is associated with young people perceiving that they have no future, that humanity is doomed, and that governments are failing to respond adequately, and with feelings of betrayal and abandonment by governments and adults. Climate change and government inaction are chronic stressors, end quote. Psychologists and researchers have taken pains to point out that climate anxiety is not a diagnosis, it's a valid response to the current situation in the world. One way that we can address youth mental health is to boldly confront climate change. I want to thank this council for all the work they've done on that. We've taken some great first steps, but scientists are telling us that we need to do more. We have to drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels by 2030, which is just around the corner. Let's announce this year that by the end of that year, 2030, we will be off of natural gas in our homes and buildings. Last year, a coalition of 18 area organizations asked this council to make that announcement. We didn't get there. Let's make this the year that we get it done. I can't imagine a more powerful signal to our youth that we hear them. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Deborah Leese M.
Hello, and thank you, Council. As tied into our last speaker, I would like to recognize that we are standing on the unceded territory of the Ramaytush Ohlone. Hello, Council. Thank you for hearing me. Last week, I listened to your words and intentions for environmental policies and your love for nature. I'm here to remind you that genocide and ecocide are inextricably linked, not only by militarized violence upon the earth, but by the murder and displacement of Indigenous land stewards. How can one tell who is Indigenous to land? Indigenous people do not burn, destroy acres of olive trees, and drop bombs and white phosphorus, destroying plants, animals, and people. 3 months of bombing Gaza produced more planet-warming gases than 20 climate-vulnerable nations did in a full year. Also, please note that ceasefire is a military term, with the opposing term being open fire. There is no neutral term. By supporting open fire policy, you are approving endless bombing that has irreparable damage inflicted upon the Earth's rhizosphere and the sky's atmosphere. It doesn't matter that Palestine is thousands of miles away, as we all share the same air current, tides, and jet streams. We are at a tipping point globally. Please put our planet and our people before profit. Consider a ceasefire in order to cease the fire that is engulfing our Earth. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michelle H.
Thank you. Michelle Higgins, a resident of Palo Alto. I'm going to start tonight, now that I have a little bit more time, with a poem by Masab Abu Toha. I apologize for probably mispronouncing his name, but he is a renowned Palestinian poet who was detained as he attempted to leave Gaza with his 3-year-old child in his arms. His child is an American citizen. He was detained and tortured and only released after international outcry. Just one of many stories. This is the poem. She is reading from a book. A bomb shakes the neighborhood, and then more bombs rain down. There's no safe place. She hides in a passage on the page. The book is closed. No one survives to open it. I'd just like to recognize the attempts to erase and silence Palestinian voices. I will keep elevating them. Council members, you appear to be almost entirely unmoved by our previous efforts to ask you to urgently agendize a ceasefire resolution. And for that, I am sad and sorry. The people of Palo Alto have not done enough when compared to our compassionate neighbors, less privileged neighbors across the Bay Area. From the comfort of our Palo Alto bubble, we have watched a genocide unfold on our phones and decided that it is too difficult or divisive or unpopular to engage. We have failed the test and failed it badly, the one that asks, what would you do? And of course, we fail these tests all the time. But this time, our government's dollars and diplomatic cover have made us fully complicit partners in perpetuating gross and unprecedented violations of international law, including collective punishment. We cannot say at a later date that we did not know. We knew and either chose to speak out publicly, at great risk, by the way, or to remain silent and complicit. What choice will you make, council members? What will you tell your children and grandchildren when they ask you what you did to stop the NABCA of 2023 and 2024? What will be your excuse when they find out that you were asked repeatedly by community members to agendize a ceasefire resolution and you just said no? It is too late for the 24,000 plus Palestinians who are dead, the over 1,000 children who are now lower limb amputees,
Your time is up. Please
the
make your final statement.
25,000 children who are now orphans, but it is not too late to do the right thing. Ceasefire now. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lori M.
I've lost my voice, so I'll do my best. Thank you. I'm Lori Myers. I've lived and raised my family in Palo Alto for over 30 years. First, congratulations to Mayor Stone and Vice Mayor Lowing. Second, thank you to former Chair Coloma Smith and the Human Relations Commission for last week's listening session with the Jewish community. Two main takeaways. Takeaway one, anti-Semitism is real and present here in Palo Alto. The diverse group of over 50 speakers from the Jewish community shared statistics like Jews are the target of 60% of hate crimes, but are only 2% of the population, and personal painful stories of overt anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic microaggressions in Palo Alto, on our streets, in our schools, in our library, in our day-to-day lives, and more. Takeaway 2, we are blessed to live in Palo Alto, where we have a Human Relations Commission that invited us to meet and that is ready to work with us on solutions like implementing the gold standard U.S. national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. It is an excellent, vetted playbook for cities for tackling anti-Semitism. In fact, it's so good that the U.S. Council of Mayors has even co-created an implementation guide for this strategy, specifically for cities, and the Human Relations Commission received copies of this. We look forward to working with HRC and our city council to combat anti-Semitism and to partner with you to build the kind of Palo Alto we know we can have, one with true unity between all of our residents. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Matt S.
Hello, my name is Matt Schlegel. I use he, him pronouns, and I speak to you from colonized Ohlone land. In 2023, our city launched a water heater replacement program to help residents replace their dirty, polluting, methane gas burning water heaters with clean electric heat pump water heaters. The goal was to replace 1,000 water heaters. As of December 28th, the program replaced 153 water heaters. The good news is that there's a couple hundred more in the queue for replacement, but that's still far short of the 1,000 target. While the program targeted 1,000 replacements in the year, that's still less than half the number of gas water heaters that fail in our city each year. Every water heater that gets replaced with another gas water heater locks in years more of burning fossil fuels and emitting CO2 that is blanketing the earth and trapping heat. You know that 2023 was the hottest year in recorded history, and 2024 will likely be even hotter. We must stop adding to that heat trapping blanket. Our kids need bold action from us now if we want to preserve a habitable planet for them and help them manage their eco-anxiety. This year, let's ramp up the water heater replacement rate to match the actual failure rate of gas water heaters in the city. Also, we must have peace if we are to unite to fight the forces that are driving the climate crisis. I agree that the council must call for a ceasefire if you are serious about fighting the climate crisis. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Aram J.
So, Julie, I'm looking at your piece. I've slightly renamed it Palestine, Israel, and Me. You actually is Israel, Palestine, and Me. But on page 5, it reads, the New York Times chart below shows the deaths on both sides of the Israel-Palestine conflict in just the most recent 15 years, with Palestinian civilians dying at a rate of at least 25-1. Yet I don't hear any mainstream collective outrage and compassion over these deaths. That was what you wrote in your piece. Well, guess what? We've hit 25-1 again. And yet you're not calling for a ceasefire. And, you know, there's been a lot of weaponization of the phrase anti-Semitism. If you're saying you're requesting a ceasefire in the Zionist perspective, in the white supremacist, Jewish white supremacist community, that's anti-Semitism, just saying the word ceasefire. What that really is just simply an attempt to silence people on this issue. Now, one of the things that really concerns me, I'm going to approach this slightly from a different perspective. By the way, Julie, I understand there's a debate tomorrow night at the Jewish Community Center with congressional candidates, and you do know, right, that you're going to have to swear a loyalty oath to Israel to even to participate in that debate. I'm not sure if I'm serious on that point, but it's going to be close to that. You watch. In any event, I've been looking at First Amendment cases, and I see, I know the city of Los Altos had a ceasefire resolution proposal. I spoke there. It was turned down by the city council. I got to hear their reasoning. I didn't agree with their reasoning. The same in the city of Santa Clara. I went there, I spoke. They put a ceasefire resolution on the agenda so the community could speak to it, but also so we could be fully informed on what the members of the city council there felt on the issue. I'd like to know what Ed Lowing has to say. I know he's a fellow Jew. He may be opposed to the ceasefire. He may think it's just fine, the genocide that's occurring over there, but at least I'd like to hear it from his own mouth. He may say just the opposite. I have no idea. But the case law, the First Amendment case law suggests that by you keeping the issue off the agenda altogether, you're violating our First Amendment rights to even have a robust discussion on the topic. If you turn it down, oh, well, that's on you. But at least you can say, we offered the community an opportunity, the Jewish community, the Zionist community, the Arab community, the Palestinian community, all can voice their opinion on this most critical issue of the day. The case law really favors that you all let us have that conversation. If you go 7-zip against the ceasefire resolution, well, so be it. At least we had an opportunity to hear what you have to say on it. Put it on the agenda, ceasefire now, at least have the guts.
Your time is up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jordan Jay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi, this is Sarah Woodham, actually on my son's account. I've been a 17-year resident of Palo Alto with a lot of vested interest in this community. I'm asking tonight for the city council to draft and pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire in this Israeli war on Gaza. I want to appeal to you as our city leaders with compassion to elevate voices of local residents who are in soul-crushing pain at this point. Not to mention, as our children watch, the unrelenting scale of loss of life in Gaza. We ask you to draft a resolution calling for our government to leverage its power to effect a ceasefire between the parties. What is being accomplished now is contrary to the stated objectives, in my opinion. It is, objectively speaking, a massacre of tens of thousands of children and innocents, with survivors who are maimed, completely traumatized, starved, and deprived of basic human rights. Every day I can't stand it even less. We are complicit here. And I do believe that if you use your bully pulpit, we can accelerate the process to our district, state, and federal representatives to figuring out where to from here. Where to from here, centered around human rights for all alike, and let's save thousands of lives in the process. Surely, our values compel us to empathize and do something, and do anything more than watch whole percentages of a population be decimated in this way. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Avro S.
Greetings, City Council members. My name is Avro Shah, and I'm here today as a representative of the Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition, or PASC. I'm a freshman at Palo Alto High School, and the words of Andrea earlier were very much accurate around the depiction of climate anxiety, something that I, as a child and student, very much experience. And I see my classmates experiencing this whenever the topic of climate change is brought up. Climate anxiety is very much real, and it is something that we cannot ignore. Every day, when I get out of bed, I'm uncertain of my future. As I go throughout my day, I remain uncertain. And when I get home, when I'm doing homework, the topic plagues my mind as I struggle to distract myself from this impending future. When I look in the mirror, I see stress lines forming. Even now, as I speak, I don't speak for self-fulfillment. I speak out of necessity, as we don't see our local and global leaders prioritizing climate action to the degree that they should. It would be great if our leaders would take appropriate action without literal children having to push them in the right direction. We're forced to accept this hopeless future of doom, which is, quite frankly, devastating. And while our council seems to prioritize mental health, I don't see why we don't prioritize climate action to the same degree, even if the relation is so clear. Empathize. A world, our future, where there's smoke in the air, where we don't go down the right path. That's not a future I want to see, because I don't want to see my future compromised. But we have not seen the necessary action over the past few years. The news is crazy, and the events that are happening, climate related, will only get crazier. And while the work we saw in 2023 was great, we must do much, much more. So please, for the sake of youth mental health and the environment, set climate action as the #1 priority in 2024 and take action accordingly. Thank you.
And that concludes public comment on items not on the agenda.
Great, thank you. We will now move to council member questions, comments, and announcements. Councilmember Lithcott-Ames.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to commend Youth Community Service for putting on a wonderful MLK Day set of activities. I know a number of us were there yesterday, and just a reminder of the tremendous role they play, not only in supporting our youth, but in really being at the center of our community, giving us all opportunities to learn and grow and connect. And there were a number of people there from other communities as well. East Palo Alto is a big partner with Palo Alto, of course, around our MLK Day festivities. It was just a lovely convening. A couple hundred people were there, and hats off to Youth Community Service. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no other lights, then we will move on to the consent calendar. We'll first start with public comment on the consent calendar. Those are consent calendar items 1 through 12.
No hands are raised and there are no requests to speak on consent calendar items.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Then we'll move to, then I'll entertain a motion.
Did my light come on?
Councilmember Koo?
Okay, thank you. I would like to register no vote.
So doing motions, and then I'll
Then you too.
ask for
Okay,
that.
sure, thank you.
So moved. Good. And a second? I guess I'll second. Thank you. Now I'll entertain no votes or request to pull. So Councilmember Koo.
Thank you, Mayor Stone. I would like to register no votes on 11 and 12. Thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka.
No on 4 and 6.
Seeing no other lights, clerk can.
Oh, sorry, also 10.
And if clerk can take the vote when you're ready.
Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott-Ames,
Yes.
Councilmember Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Lowing.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Councilmember Ku, would you like to speak to your no votes?
Certainly. Thank you so much, Mayor Stone. On 11, the changes that are incorporating some more sidewalk and other public spaces uses that may impact the sidewalk and public area uses. So there should be a public discussion so that it is highlighted to the stakeholders within the business districts. And at this point, I'm not even sure that they know about this. And on item number 12, extension of the project entitlements by 18 months should be done case by case versus applying it to all projects. Many of these projects come before City Council for their upzoning, and if an extension is needed and given by the planning director, then the council will actually have no idea what had happened and might even believe that it has expired. So I do see this is something that can be taken advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
So on 4, the issue is I don't support doubling the budget of marketing. I think programs should, I think we have budget enough and additional money is not necessary. Also, I don't support the idea of bundling 3 contracts that are not, these should have been separate items because I would have probably supported the deed grant as well as the SCAP. Although the SCAP, I didn't know if that was competitively bid or not. So for those 2 reasons, I can't support 4. On 6, I voted no before on that one, so that's not anything new. And then 10, I also voted no on that before.
Thank you. All right, that moves us to city manager comments.
Thank you, Mayor Stone. Let's see, could I get the assistance from City Clerk with a few slides? Next slide, please. As we are kicking off the new year, wanted to reiterate a few upcoming opportunities for community input on items that the city is working on. Just real quickly, first here, starting tomorrow, there is a community meeting on the proposal for a recreation wellness center. This meeting will be at Mitchell Park and be hybrid, both in person as well as online. Then next Wednesday, the 24th, for the San Antonio Road Corridor Vision Workshop. This is a project being undertaken with Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and working with our staff and community members in establishing initial concepts for potential community uses along San Antonio Road in light of proposed residential development. Then on the following Monday, the 29th, is the City Council's annual retreat. Note this is a Monday, but will not be here in the council chambers. We'll be at the Mitchell Park Community Center starting at 5:30 p.m. So we have been doing some outreach on this, but want to reiterate that community members are able to both participate at this meeting as well as provide input in advance on council's priorities for the year. And then finally, on following Wednesday, January 31st, will be a community workshop on the ongoing bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. And this one will be virtual only. So we're providing options for community input in a variety of formats, and additional events will be forthcoming in the next months. Next slide, please. Then picking up on one of the public commenters, I did want to spend a moment talking about our heat pump water heater program and the advanced heat pump water heater program. And I can speak now with personal experiences. I have passed my final inspection to get the heat pump water heater installed at my home. So quite proud of that. And that's it. Want to give a quick update on and a plug for the program. As shown here on the with this graph, I think it's fair to say that it did take a few months for our staff and our contractors to get ramped up and to hit a pace of being able to turn around requests and expressions of interest in the heat pump water heaters. But now they are definitely hitting their stride. And as such, it's a great time for anyone who has been on the fence and interested in perhaps learning more about the heat pump water heaters, as well as the city's program to really get off the fence and get on the phone or get online to sign up for this program. As noted here, with state incentives, it can bring prices as low as $13.50. Personally, it took down what could have been the value of my installation from $7,500 down to $1,400. And in fact, with the city's no interest payment over 2 years, there's only $200 out of pocket, and the rest is paid on your utility bill over the following 2 years. So for $200, a new heat pump water heater and extraordinary incentives, again, being provided by the state that will not last forever. Noting the state's budgetary situation, this is a situation where we definitely want to act as quickly as people are able to give a call to 650-713-3411 or to our city website, cityofpaloalto.org/switch, SWITCH, to take advantage of the phenomenal incentives that are now being provided for this really clean and green appliance. Next slide, please.
Sorry, before you move on, City Manager, I think
Yes.
Councilmember Lipcott-Hames has a question on that last
Yes.
slide.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City Manager, thank you for your presentation on this. I just have a brief question, which is, if a family discovers their water heater is on the fritz and they have an emergency need to repair, is it possible to get reimbursed retroactively or to be in the program retroactively added?
So at this point, I would say make this call and let staff work with you on determining options, or whoever the resident might be. That said, we are also working in parallel on an emergency replacement program that's not fully in place yet, but it is in the works, recognizing that in that type of situation, there may actually be a need to install another gas water heater, at least temporarily, while working through all of the logistics, because there are electrical upgrades that may be necessary, as well as other plumbing changes that would be necessary for installation of a heat pump water heater. So again, make the call, find out what the options are, and we hope to have additional information on this emergency replacement program very soon. Thank you for the question. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Then I want to note in recognition of our ongoing winter season and potential storms upcoming, that we have a number of resources available for community members. Simply a reminder to be prepared, as well as to look to our website, cityofpaloalto.org/storm update, for ongoing information on any upcoming events, as well as resources already available. Next slide, please. Then finally, want to note a few of your upcoming agendas. First, next week, notable that your city clerk appointment is up for action by the city council, as well as a follow-up on an item that was pulled from the consent calendar related to an easement relocation at Cal Stelea School. Then your long-range financial forecast, as well as your annual review of legislative guidelines and legislative program. Then on the 29th, as I mentioned earlier, it's your priority setting session, again at Mitchell Park Community Center, Monday evening at 5:30 p.m. Then finally, looking forward to next month, February, you'll have your mid-year budget review, as well as the follow-up discussion on the council's procedures and protocols handbook and updated ordinance language related to SB 9 projects. And that completes my report. Back to you, Mayor Stone.
Vice Mayor Lowing.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to Councilmember Lithcott Haynes' question. As a brand new owner of a heat pump through the city, I had an emergency after a disaster in plumbing that was unrelated. I went down a couple of days later. I said, "Oh no, it leaked. We got to go get the plumbers back." No, the water heater went out. I've called the phone number, got the city person right away. She said, "I'm calling the contractor. We're a little bit slow now because of the holidays, so we might be able to get you in." 3 days later, I was done. It was fantastic. And I had a lot of electrical that had to be done under the house, so my cash out for my about $8,500 estimate was about $2,000. And I'm taking advantage of the $1,200 loan. So I was just amazingly impressed with the way the city person jumped on it and the contractor jumped on it, and they were very knowledgeable. So, and P.S., they had no idea that I sit here on Monday nights.
All right, thank you. Well, it's 6:10. You're making me look really good. We are exactly right on time. So we are right now scheduled for a break. Are we fine taking the break now? Yeah, taking a break. We reached that point on the agenda. No objections? Sorry?
Kind of early.
Okay, fine with me. Then let's have our break after the tree protection ordinance. So we will move forward then with item 13. And I believe there is a staff presentation. Wonderful, thank you. And for the public, just encourage, please to raise your hand or get your speaker cards in before we move to public comment to get a sense of how many speakers we'll have.
Good evening, Mayor Stone, Vice Mayor Lowing, and Council. Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works, and with me here is Peter Gollinger, our Urban Forester. As we discussed with you in the study session last year in June, and per your direction when the new tree protection ordinance was adopted in 2022, we have evaluated the first year of implementation of that 2022 tree protection ordinance. We did identify some issues that we wanted to correct. We reviewed them with the Planning and Transportation Commission, as well as the Parks and Recreation Commission. And that really resulted in the ordinance changes that we're recommending to you for adoption tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who has some more details on that to walk through with you.
Thank you, Brad. Good evening, Mayor and council members. We have a presentation focusing on some of the updates that we're proposing. So just the 2022 ordinance that went into effect last summer, or summer 2022, expanded the definition of protected trees. It updated the allowable reasons for removal. It focused on maintenance of protected trees and had some revisions to the notification and appeals. During the passage of that update, council directed staff to evaluate the modifications to the ordinance over the next year, as well as planning implications to be reviewed by the PTC and Parks and Rec. Next slide, please. Accordingly, we did a study session with council in June and then followed up with reviews with Parks and Rec Commission and Planning and Transportation Commission. We took the feedback from those two commission meetings and have crafted the updates we have for you this evening. We recently presented them to the Palo Alto Neighborhoods regular meeting, and we're here tonight to review those with you. One thing that's going to be outstanding is coming up in this spring, we're going to explore some possible tree ordinance exemptions for certain housing projects with the Planning and Development Services Department, and then bring that to PTC for discussion. So key changes that we're bringing to you this evening are some changes to trees as a public nuisance, clarifications to sections from the 22 updated code, clarifications to the code that explain existing practices that predate the 22 update, formal exemption for tree disclosure requirements on state ADU projects, revisions to the appeals process, and updates to the allowable reasons for removal. Next slide, please. So changes to trees as a public nuisance. The existing code refers to infested trees as being able to be declared a nuisance, but it's very vague as to what qualifies as infested. So we're proposing to replace that with infestations that are included in the California Department of Food and Ag's detection and eradication programs, or infections that are injurious to trees. We're also adding language to cover trees that are declared nuisance by a court of competent jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Proposed updates for clarity. These involve the designated arborist section. It was unclear when an applicant chooses the arborist and when the city chooses the arborist. Tree disclosure. We reformatted to clarify what types of trees need to be disclosed. The 25% rule, we made some clarifications on how that's calculated. And we also changed some wording on the development moratorium to clarify the details on how they would be imposed and lifted. Next slide, please. So these are updates for existing practices. Now, these practices predated the 2022 ordinance, but were never in the ordinance. So the definition of a designated tree, there was some confusion as to whether it meant a current plan or a previously completed project. It means both. So these are projects where trees were planted as part of an approved landscape plan and therefore are integral to the landscape as a whole. So they are protected once they're planted. Tree removal permits. There are two different types of tree removal permits outside of development. For residential or low density residential, R1, R2, it is a public works permit. For commercial or larger residential projects, it would be a minor staff level architectural review. And this is predating the 2022 ordinance. This is because those trees as part of commercial projects might fulfill planning requirements, such as screening trees or architectural interest, and therefore they need to be reviewed by planning. The 25% rule was added to residential projects. This was something that had been implemented previously, but it wasn't specifically listed in that portion of the code. And we're also proposing to formalize a discretion currently used on larger projects that require the full planning approval process. Next slide, please. So this is our ADU exemption for state pathway projects. This was included in our updated T1, and we would like to include it in the code. So any ADU projects that follow the state compliance pathway only have to disclose trees. They don't have to get an arborist report. They don't have to have an arborist fill out the disclosure statement. They just have to tell us what's on the property. Next slide, please. So the intention of the 22 update regarding appeals of tree removal decisions was that the first step would be to a director's hearing. We discovered during the course of this first year that trees that were removed as part of a development project did not go to a director's hearing as a first step, but went directly to PTC. So we're adding language to address that. Next step, please. Some of the bigger updates we're proposing tonight are updates to the reasons for removal. Previously, there were two reasons that were grouped together, which were detriment to or crowding an adjacent protected tree, or impacting the foundation or eaves of a residence. Now, these were both in one bullet point, so they could only be applied to projects outside of development. We're proposing to separate those, so detriment to or crowding an adjacent protected tree can be used during a development project. We're also proposing the addition of a new reason for removal to address some of the issues that were encountered this last year. The reason is the tree is at risk for retrenchment or other tree decline coping process, or does not conform with the right tree in the right place principles. Trees that are removed outside of development under these could trigger a 24-month development moratorium. Next slide, please. So what is retrenchment and what is right tree, right place? So retrenchment is a natural process that trees undergo when they mature and start to head towards the old age for trees. Basically, they're trying to conserve resources. So they bring their resources in closer to their trunk. Sometimes they lose limbs. They can survive for a long time, but that's not necessarily a safe scenario in an urban environment. It's more out in the open space. That's fine. They can continue on for many, many years. But here in the urban environment, we want to prevent those limbs from failing. Right tree in the right place principles, it's an industry standard that discusses whether or not a tree is appropriately placed. Most commonly, this is referred to in relation to electric lines or utility infrastructure, but it also applies to other infrastructure such as buildings, roads, sidewalks. Basically making sure that the tree you're choosing is appropriate for the space provided. Next slide, please. So proposed updates for tree removal as part of development on a residential lot. As I mentioned earlier, we separated out the detriment to or crowding an adjacent protected tree, so that could be used in this situation. The new, it is at risk for retrenchment or right tree, right place, and adding in the 25% rule. As discussed earlier, this rule has been used previously, but it was not specifically called out for residential projects. This is where the tree protection zone of a tree or trees takes up more than 25% of the buildable area on a lot. Slide, please. So proposed updates as part of a commercial development. This is the new language we're proposing to capture discretion that was already used by staff when reviewing these larger projects. During the 2022 update, lengthy discussions with planning and development and CAO, we felt that this discretion was granted in Title 18, but a stricter reading of Title 18 didn't grant it or deny it. So we're putting it in place here to try and capture that. Slide, please. We're also requesting an update to the administrative penalty list. This is a list that staff can use when writing citations. It has not been updated for many years, and many of our code sections aren't even included in the current version. So what we've proposed is more in line with the updated ordinance. Some additional actions that were discussed with Parks and Rec and Planning and Transportation would be elimination of one or more specific protected native species, increasing the diameter threshold for protected native species, or increasing the diameter threshold for others, and maybe additional changes to removal. None of these proposals were popular with either commission, so we didn't explore those further. Next slide, please. In addition, we did discuss some potential actions related to housing. And again, I mentioned this earlier, we're going to continue to work on this with planning and development staff and bring any proposals back to PTC this spring. There was one omission in the red line that accompanied the staff report. We intended to add this change to 81070. It's included in the staff report, but not in attachment A in the red line. So we're asking that any motion tonight includes this change. So this is a clarification on request to exceed the limits for excessive pruning. This is in regards to trees that are maintained as a hedge or as pollarded trees or other practices that might require a greater pruning on an annual basis. They can seek permission and it's good for 5 years. So we're proposing that that be included as part of the motion.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's move then to public comment. How many speakers do we have, Madam Clerk?
We currently have 6 requests to speak.
Looks like we'll have 7. Then we'll do 3 minutes per speaker, and if you could please close off the speakers after the first speaker.
Our first speaker is JPR.
Good evening. Hello, my name is JP Renault, and I'm the, as of this month, new-ish executive director of Canopy. It's my 5th month, so I think I've graduated from new to new-ish. I want to first, as my new role here, not only in Canopy, but in this community, thank you for the warm welcome I've received from many of you. This community is definitely a welcoming one, and I'm very lucky to be part of an organization that's so deeply committed in the fabric of this city. As we heard from our urban forester, the proposed red light changes in the ordinance have been suggested by staff after 1 year of practical observation. The proposed changes reflect experiences and situations that staff and residents have encountered this past year. We support these recommendations as they clarify several positions critical to smooth implementation and better reflect the realities on the ground. We believe it would be premature and counterproductive to contemplate additional changes when this ordinance is still in its infancy. Over the past year, especially during the challenging winter storms, Canopy heard much from our community. There remains work to be done to understand the health of our drought-affected trees, and where to prioritize ongoing care and tree work in our current environment. Our core belief, however, that healthy trees and healthy communities go hand in hand is stronger than ever. In every community that Canopy works in, we believe that resident input and buy-in is essential to the health of a successful urban forest. Even though we believe that this is still too early to contemplate further changes to the ordinance beyond the proposed ones at this time, we also believe that the city should continue to actively track the impact on residents throughout the city and apply discretion when people's lives and property are at stake. We want to thank our urban forestry department for their thoughtful work this past year. As you know, Palo Alto is uniquely blessed to have a robust urban forestry department, and there's no question that you are the leader in this critical urban issue. As you know, Canopy has worked in partnership with the city of Palo Alto since Canopy's founding in 1996. It was thanks to concerned citizens like the ones who come here every day that this organization became so successful. And we continue that work through contracted cities throughout our region, through tree planting, care, and education, just as important. Canopy also contracts with other local governments for specified and tailored needs to those areas.
Your time is up. Please make your final statement.
I want to just wrap up by just reminding everybody of the community concerns ahead of time. As an aside, these citizens' concerns are about climate change, extreme heat, mental health, and finding bonds of peace among us. And the power of trees and putting them together in communities can address some of those most powerful concerns. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Simon P.
Good evening. Thank you very much for making time for me to talk. My name is Simon Pennington. I'm a longtime Palo Alto resident, and I live in the Barron Park neighborhood. As you're well aware, 2023 was the hottest year on record, and global climate change models predict that this warming trend will only get much, much, much worse. While cutting our CO2 emissions, great news on the heat pumps, by the way, I love that. While cutting our CO2 emissions is critically important, these efforts are all useless. They are all for naught if we continue to destroy our environment at the current pace. And this brings us to the current state of affairs in Palo Alto. This evening, you'll be assessing to what level we protect the trees in our city. Palo Alto is blessed to have an abundant tree canopy, which spares us from the hottest days in the summer, thus saving a small fortune on air conditioning bills. In addition, trees take carbon out of the atmosphere and also scrub particulate pollution from the air we breathe. And they also provide a home for a rich profusion of wildlife. It is also worth noting that our tree canopy is a major selling point for the many real estate agents and developers who make a very good living supporting buyers and sellers in Palo Alto. And these increased property taxes also support all of the efforts of our city. I say all this because it's evident that our tree canopy is being decimated. 20 trees alone have been felled on the street I live on in the last 2 years. One property just down the road, just before Thanksgiving, lost 4 mature redwoods. They were removed, not because they were diseased, not because they were unstable, but because they were in the way of a new massive house, which was to take up every square inch legally available to the developer. That part of the street, I can tell you right now, will be intolerably hot this summer. Obviously, diseased or truly unstable trees should be removed and hopefully new trees planted in their place. But many of the trees that I now seeing being felled around Palo Alto seem to suffer from nothing more than being in the way of the latest mega house, most of which would make Louis XIV blush. Please protect our tree canopy to keep our streets cool, to keep the air clean, and for the generations to come. And I would like to also thank Canopy. They work with cities like East Palo Alto, who are desperately trying to grow the tree canopy that we are so lucky to have. So thank you so much for your service. I wish you all the very best for a happy and healthy 2024. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Leah R.
Good evening. It's nice to see you all again. I'm the woman who had a tree fall on her house after being told it could not be removed because 2 certified arborists looked at it and said it was healthy. It fell during these so-called unusual storms, after which many insurers announced they were no longer going to be covering California because they predict that these storms are our new normal. I agree that climate change is terrifying and it is coming. I think this ordinance is the wrong approach. We need flexibility, we need adaptation, we need mitigation. Preserving and locking in the landscaping decisions made by wildlife and people over a century ago are not going to protect us in the future. We need incentives to encourage people to plant and maintain trees, not disincentives encouraging people to cut down trees before they become so big they will no longer be able to. There is nothing in this ordinance to encourage anyone to take care of trees, to view them as partners and things that contribute to the benefit of our community. Instead, it pits our homeowners against their urban forest in their backyard. And I speak as someone who no longer has a personal stake in this because I no longer have any large trees on my property. I will be planting a magnolia once I am done fixing the damage done by the 80-foot Douglas fir that crashed into my house when I was sitting there with my toddler. I'm here because I want to make sure that wrong-headed policy does not require other Palo Altans to face the terrifying moment that I still recall. So I encourage you strongly to look at the letter that I sent earlier today. It includes within it a number of forward-looking policy suggestions coming from other cities across California and across the country. I happen to know a lot about this because this is an issue I worked on for Senator Dianne Feinstein. We talked about how to protect urban forests in the face of climate change, and I will tell you that command and control, such as this, is the way of the past. We need to encourage people, we need incentives, and we need flexibility. Right tree, right place is a good step. It does not go far enough. Right tree, right place is something developed in the context of utility lines. It does not look at how citizens use their own property. It does not look at a family wanting to install a playground underneath a tree that drips sap. That's an inconsistent use. It is unclear whether right tree, right place would allow a family who buys a home with a walnut tree would be allowed to remove it if their son has a walnut allergy. It is too vague. It does not give people clear understanding of what they can do with their own property. And I think it's the wrong way to be approaching this situation at this time. I commend the city for looking at the situation, but this is the wrong policy at the wrong time. Thank you.
Our next speaker is John Kay.
Mayor Stone, Vice Mayor Lowing, council members, I'd like to associate myself with everything that Leah just said. I think she's really got the right idea here. I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to ask you to take this item off the agenda tonight, to postpone it to a future meeting, and to direct the staff to do some additional work. What's that additional work? Well, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the dialogue that led up to the 2022 revisions of the tree ordinance consisted of a small number of people working in an ad hoc group. The staff report talks about all the city meetings that were held. Frankly, the meetings that were important that should have been held were meetings with design professionals. That kind of one-on-one dialogue that we have had with regard to the ADU ordinance, which I think has benefited tremendously from consultation from design professionals, hasn't happened with regard to the tree ordinance. And thus there's suspicion here. So you're in kind of a tough spot tonight. You've got a lot of people saying that we should protect every last tree to the fullest extent possible and not cut down any tree in this city under any circumstances. And then you've got other people who feel like they have been harmed, they might be harmed, or they know others who might be harmed because of large trees. The city staff report recites almost by rote some language that keeps being used, that what occurred last year was unusual. It was an unprecedented series of storms. There were winds coming from the non-prevailing directions. And at the Parks and Recreation Committee meeting, at the PTC meeting, we heard that same language being said again and again and again. And it just so happens that on the night of one of those meetings, there was a huge tree that fell down in the middle of Rinconada Park. I didn't see any reference to that event happening in the staff report. So I've sent you a letter, I've provided you with pictures of it. I've spoken with a man who could have been seriously harmed. And I've also wondered myself, what would have happened if that tree had come down a little bit earlier in the day when lots of kids are going home from school through Rinconada Park? Would some of those children have been in the same situation that Leah was in with her family? We need to give homeowners the tools and the ability to manage risks sensibly. Even the city staff with the outstanding talents of urban forestry couldn't protect that tree. Stop saying that it was an unusual situation that happened last year. I commend the prior speaker. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. Yes, we should pay attention to climate change. Yes, we should pay attention to global warming. Yes, trees can be part of the solution, but so can housing. And it's already in the staff report. Read what the staff has said about how you should reconsider this further. But do it now and do it with consultation with design professionals.
Your time is up. Please wrap up.
The clock here says I have 3 more seconds, but I was finished anyway. So
no, you were 3 seconds over. Thank you. Our next speaker is Winter D.
Winter Dellenbach. I feel that there's either willful ignorance about both the new ordinance and the new proposals, or misunderstanding, but some of this is a little hard to hear. Here are some facts. California's urban forest tree cover is the lowest among all US states per capita. The nonprofit Canopy's tree plotter software indicates that our city lost more trees in 2021 and 22 than we lost in 2010. This was before the new tree ordinance and before the big storms. We cannot lose more ground if we're serious about climate change and meeting our 2030 goals. We need to plant more trees while protecting those that we have. This isn't radical. Science magazines, wherever scientists are increasing their concern that humanity will not survive unless we keep the trees we have and we plant more everywhere. Please ratify the staff report recommendation and proposals and avoid more substantial reductions in tree protection. Could you please put up my slide? So this is I hope you can see this. This is a cautionary slide for all of us, and amusing, I hope. I thought it was too perfect. Also, please adopt the resolution amending the administrative penalty schedule to increase the penalties for violation. Penalties must be appropriately set high enough to prevent tree destruction, as has just happened in my neighborhood to the great upset and dismay of neighbors. A builder chose to cut so many roots of a big carbon sequestering out of the way protected tree that it was destabilized and had to be cut down because it was unsafe. Rendered unsafe. According to Science Connected magazine, the urban forest in California consists of 173 million trees valued at a whopping $181 billion, providing over $8 billion of services annually. For every dollar spent on maintaining our state's urban trees, the return averages $2.52 in benefits, such as the amount of carbon dioxide removed combined with emissions avoided by California's urban forests is equivalent to taking 1.8 million cars off the road. The rainfall intercepted by our urban forests is the equivalent to the amount of potable water consumed by almost 500,000 California households each year. Urban trees save electricity used for air conditioning by lowering temperatures, and during the winter by reducing wind speed, helping
Your
to
time is
prevent
up.
cold
Please
air from
wrap
entering
up your
homes.
statement.
Please recommit tonight to reasonable, balanced tree protections, which are in the recommendation. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jeff G.
Good evening, Mayor Stone and council members. My casual tire is due to coming straight here from the soccer field, but happy to be here. I'm speaking this evening initially as the Parks and Recreation Commission Chair. The commission reviewed the staff recommendation and unanimously supported staff's recommendation. The commission also unanimously recommended not to pursue any of the other potential changes outlined by staff. The commission appreciated the complexity of the Title VIII ordinance and the thoughtfulness and thoroughness of the staff recommendation. The commission also recognized that the other potential changes are not in the staff recommendation because staff does not recommend these changes at this time. So that was an important part of the commission's thought process. Speaking for myself, our challenge here this evening is to strike a balance between preserving and growing our dwindling urban canopy and the health, environmental, and SCAP benefits of our trees versus property owner, resident, and developer flexibility and discretion. Recently learning that our urban canopy is shrinking rather than growing is surprising and distressing, frankly. We should view this as a wake-up call. All this bit about trying to preserve trees and growing our canopy isn't that we're in a great place here and we need to just preserve it. We're losing ground and we need to act to preserve it. The proposal by staff is going a long way towards that. I've worked at length with staff, both within my role on the commission as an individual to help review and update the ordinance and to better reflect our goals as a community, including clarifying and tightening up language, adapting compliance with regulations, and improving the overall balance. The Muni Code's a living document. It evolves over time. We'll make more changes in the future as we need. Put up the first slide, please. Finally, I strongly propose the updates to the administrative penalty schedule. These updates are long overdue. First, I want to show you a house down the street from me on Waverly near near JLS. This is a Tupelo tree that, as you can see before, a major remodel was done. Next slide, please. This is the tree during the start of construction with little bloom. Next slide, please. This is the tree after construction was completed. This is a 50-foot wide lot with a U driveway put in it. The tree was butchered pretty badly. Next slide. This is today. Under the current administrative penalties, the penalty levied was $500 for this malfeasance. Under the updated plan, that it would be estimated to be $4,550.
Your time is up. Please wrap up your comment.
They may not stop deep-pocketed developers from taking trees down, but at least it helps us move in the right direction. Again, thank you for your time and urge you to support the staff's recommendation.
Our next speaker is Karen H.
Pullman, that would be. Good evening, everybody, and congratulations to our new mayor and vice mayor. There you are. So good evening. Staff's recommendations are reasonable refinements, and I support them. Please don't react to a winter of extreme weather or uncommon situations by taking a step backwards in tree protection. The only way to eliminate the possibility of a tree falling is to eliminate all the trees. Likewise, the only way to eliminate the possibility of car crashes is to take all the cars off the streets. Neither is practical. And in fact, trees' very presence helps to mitigate the negative impacts of cars. And cutting down trees releases the carbon they store and keep out of the air we breathe. Something that Jeff just said reminded me of something else too. We have lost literally billions of birds, including in neighborhoods and in urban settings in the last decades. And a good reason for that is because of loss of habitat. Birds are not only, songbirds that we enjoy, people who are birders enjoy looking at them, but they help keep insect populations down that are negative to our environment. So think about that as well. That's just one of the benefits of birds. We have lost literally billions of birds in the last decades, plural. And quickly, as we add housing, the need for trees is even more important in numerous ways that create a healthy place for people to live. Please don't take a step backward and make Palo Alto lag behind other neighboring cities in recognizing the essential value of trees. Thank you.
That concludes public comment on action item 13.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our public commenters. We will return to the dais for council discussion and deliberation. Everything. Questions, comments, motions. Councilmember Burt.
Thank you. So I wanted to get a sense of kind of how these changes might affect some of the scenarios that we've encountered. Ms. Ruskin's scenario we're familiar with. Would these changes in any way have resulted in a different outcome in that case?
It is possible that the tree in that situation would have been the wrong tree for that particular place without having been able to inspect it. I wouldn't be able to say for sure, but that's part of why we are including the right tree in the right place principles. It's intended to match the tree to the location. And while that is primarily used in conjunction with utility lines, it is an all-encompassing thing that includes whether the tree is compatible with the actual physical location for the tree, also with the use. So it allows us some flexibility.
So that's interesting, and it seems in the right direction conceptually. It seems like we really don't have a lot of guidance that I'm aware of what constitutes right tree and wrong tree. That seems like it's a good approach in principle, but I don't see it flushed out in any way, including what might be hazards. If you have a healthy tree or one that is perceived to be healthy, in this case that then fell over shortly, how might that have been judged to have been a wrong tree in that place?
I don't think you could use the right tree, right place in terms of the unexpected health issues with the tree. It would be more the tree is not compatible with the space or the use of the space.
Well, you're familiar with this particular location, right? In this circumstance that occurred?
Yes.
So would you, on what basis would you might have determined that it was a wrong tree in that location?
So in all cases, if you're applying for the removal, there would be an arborist report submitted with the application. And so the arborist would present the case for why this tree is the wrong tree in the wrong place. We would review that and if appropriate, approve it. So that's the intention of this. The principles, there's a short list of principles in the staff report. We plan to include a full list of principles in the tree and landscape technical manual. which we plan to bring to the city manager for approval shortly after this, if we have an update here, as soon as it goes into effect.
Okay. And I guess one of the things that we need to all recognize is even if we move in a direction of looking toward trying to assure public safety, when you're in an environment with many mature trees, there's no way to remove all risks from those. And I ask that in the context of the big oak that fell in Rinconada, entrapped, but fortunately did not seriously injure a resident with disabilities. Have you looked at that scenario and whether any of these changes would in any way affect that, including, even though this on public property, the aspects on the pruning that I saw, and I was kind of struggling to understand what will be permissible pruning. It seemed pretty restrictive. Of course, we have many examples of people just going in and abusing pruning at the same time. And so it's always this question, trying to find that right balance. But can you speak to that example as well? And I'm only using these because it helps me visualize, okay, cases like this, not because I'm trying to go back and correct something that already happened.
So I think with that particular tree, from the ground, there was no obvious issue. And once the tree fell, there was a flaw that was discovered where it broke. I don't think that's something that we could have anticipated unless we had been up in that tree at the time to see it. So I don't think that this would have any relevance to that specifically.
Yeah, and as I think about the impact of irrigation on oak root rot, and we've on a lot of and private areas, we've become more aware of that in recent decades and removed irrigation underneath, but it doesn't fix rot that might have occurred for decades. So from that safety standpoint, do you have any thoughts on how we might address that latent risk?
That would be difficult to ascertain without doing like a full root crown excavation with air spade. And unless you have a suspicion, I don't know that that's practical to do on a large scale basis.
Okay.
We have done it on selected trees to confirm whether or not the tree can be saved or is stable.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kudos to you, Mr. Pennington, for your Louis XIV's reference. You definitely get tonight's award for best analogy, although the night is young and I wouldn't put it past the mayor to one up you. You never know. To climate change and its impact on tree canopy. I agree with the concerns that have been expressed that last year's winter storms are being described as very unusual in the staff report, when, for example, on the Finance Committee, and we've discussed budget, we discuss in that context the fact that the winter storm we experienced last year is more like our new normal, and we should plan accordingly. So I want to caution all of us from speaking from both sides of our mouth about climate change. I'm pretty sure we all here believe the science, and while there will of course be fluctuation winter to winter, summer to summer, I don't think it serves to suggest that a winter like we had last year is not likely to happen again. In reading the staff report, I find myself feeling deeply concerned about homeowner property rights, wanting people who buy homes here to be able to rely on our regulations so that they can predict what they're able to do with their lot, with their home. And I personally find these rules and regulations quite detailed, quite confusing, and I worry about compliance. I worry about one's ability as a resident here to abide by these, even if we want to, as I presume most people would want to. So I'm in favor of simpler language, simpler regulations. I did appreciate Ms. Ruskin's suggestion that, I forget how she put it, control and, I didn't write it down. you had a phrase, command and control, was not as useful as proper incentives to get people to do the right thing. So an additional concern I have is related to the production of housing, and I'd like to ask you, Mr. I can't remember your Gollinger, sorry, thank you so much. I want to ask you a question about incentives. We need to protect and increase our canopy, and we feel a need to protect and increase our housing supply here in the city. We're certainly being asked to increase our housing supply by the state. And I would hope that these goals would not be in tension. So I'm wondering what your sense is of the feasibility of a program that would allow homeowners to remove unwanted mature trees in order to, say, build an ADU, and then be required to replace any tree they removed with two trees. So it's sort of a 2-to-1 replacement on their own property, or perhaps to pay into a fund that the city would manage or Canopy would manage that would allow us to plant more trees across the watershed, or to pay for new trees to plant on public lands. Lower income residents could apply for funds for tree planting or maintenance on their lots. It feels to me to be an option that is allowing people to do what they may want to do with their lot while resulting in more tree production, which is, I think, the ultimate goal in terms of trees' benefit to climate and our overall enjoyment in the city. So what are your thoughts on that concept?
So we do include the carve out for state pathway ADUs, which would be those that meet the state guidelines. I believe it's 800 square feet or less, and there's some other regulations as well. So we can't prevent those if a tree is in the way. It's a straight up or down, yes or no. For larger projects, we have the ability to work around selected tree removals if there is no other option. So if the ADU can only be placed where a tree is, then they can apply to have that tree be removed and replaced accordingly. It doesn't fit all situations. Some lots may have you could move it just a little bit. Again, that's something that we're discussing. And if we need to make additional changes, that'll come up when we work on this with planning and development services.
Thank you.
Can I add one tidbit on there? We hear a lot about the concern with housing and adding ADUs, which is a high priority of the community. In checking on the statistics on that with the planning department, about 90% of the applications and building permits for ADUs that have been received and issued over the past 3 years fall within that 800 square feet or less that is exempt from our tree ordinance per the state requirements. So just wanted to make sure it's clear that the vast majority of ADU applications we're receiving are not subject to these requirements. There's just a simple disclosure of the trees on site that can be prepared by the applicant without even an arborist report.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that information. And it dovetails with my last question, which is really the notion that further conversation is going to be had on the housing exemption changes to Title VIII. Those topics are coming back to the PTC this spring. And I believe it was Mr. Kelly who suggested that maybe the whole item be tabled until that time so that we can really address these issues all at once. I'd love your thought. What is it that we will be getting or hearing about in the spring versus what we're seeing now? And is there merit to consolidating these items?
Well, essentially, the way I would describe it is that when this ordinance was adopted in 2022, and we heard the concerns from residents, property owners, that perhaps it could be going too far. In response to that, the council asked us to carefully track issues and discuss those with the boards and commissions and bring them back to you. So as we thought about the timing of this, it was a council priority objective to do it by the end of 2023. The issue of the exemptions for housing came up, and we did consider whether we might want to delay. But in actuality, what we brought you today is adding considerable flexibility to what was passed by council in 2022. So as we thought about it, we didn't want to wait and hold up addressing the issues we had already identified and giving more flexibility to residents and projects than currently exists while we did that other work.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Actually, I think I'd like to add one other comment, if I might, Mayor, Councilmember Luthgott-Hames, and that is related to our housing element. And Director Late could expand on this if there's interest in doing it, but did want to note that this approach that Director Eggleston described of two-step is consistent with the feedback we received from HCD, in that HCD, one of the comments was that requesting the city to analyze the potential constraint on ADUs as well as other housing types. And so in effect, that analysis is ongoing with respect to the other housing types. And you have already received changes noted earlier last year, as well as what's being proposed here.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Lowing, followed by Councilmember Vinker.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just like to say first to staff and the PRC and PTC, you did everything the council asked, and you did it really fast to come back in a year. So there's not enough cases that have come up in a year to be completely exhaustive on everything we're looking at, but you're doing exactly what we asked to get us to this point. And I think that as we go forward here, if this is going to go forward and get approved, I don't think we should stop it to do more work. I think we should approve it and keep doing more work, which is what you proposed on the housing issues and a lot of some of the other related issues. So my first question is that, on the Planning Commission, they talk a lot about objective standards. And to the extent that you can get these to be objective standards with some sort of provision, that would be great. Other than that, you've got scientists here. But then you have sort of homeowner preferences, and all three of those are completely different buckets. So I think we have to look at those all differently in the way we approach this. So the first one I want to ask about is a precision one, which is right out of the ordinance of 8.10.050, where you put in that new item 4 that you talk about a lot in the staff report. And for all of the interest in getting that there, it still seems like it's a pretty broad definition. If it's impacting the foundations or eaves of a resident or any covered parking required, what does impacting mean? I mean, is that just it's not safe to the house because it's right there, or that at this point, that doesn't seem to be, here's the 12 things that could be.
So I think the intent in that is, if you were to say damaging, that means you couldn't remove it until damage had already occurred. So if there's proof that the tree is impacting the foundation or eaves, meaning it's beginning to actually possibly push on those, then that would be allowed for removal, even though there's not damage. I think previously it said damage. And so we wanted to have the ability to preventively remove those when they were going to become a problem and there was no way to alleviate it.
And it seems like you intentionally left out the word sidewalk here. So if it damages sidewalk, we just fix it?
Correct.
Okay. That was one of my key questions, which is I think what we should do, not be taking down trees, we can fix the sidewalk. And then telephone wires are basically just as normal, which is we got to cut a hole out of the tree so the wires get clearance there.
Correct. So we do run our own line clearance program to clear the electric lines.
Yeah.
And we're continually encouraging homeowners to either plant appropriate trees under the power lines or help them with a removal and replacement program.
Yeah. Okay. And now I want to shift to sort of the partly the science and partly, what do they call it, acts of God. Many years ago, your predecessor, Mr. Doctor, came out and looked at my yard and looked at a magnolia tree. I said, this looks bad. He goes, you're right, it's dying. It's fine, but just watch it and let me know, and I'll let you know when we can take it down. I also had 15 feet away, a massive ash tree that was in great shape. Subsequently, about 2 years later, the ash tree died entirely. It was doing great. And today I still prune my magnolia tree. It's still there. So even with the science doing the best they can from looking at the tree, you can't always make a call like that. But what concerns me, if we didn't have at least that, then we're almost having arbitrary decisions by homeowners saying, I just don't like this tree anymore. I want to put in another one. And maybe there is a way we can plan for that and what the costing would be and so on. So I think that is one of the things that we should look at. But the last thing I want to comment on is the storms. And I basically agree with sort of both sides of the coin that I've heard tonight, is that we can't be thinking about the storms are going to be going away, because it doesn't matter. Storms are going to always be here. Last winter, in the bad storm, my neighbor has two redwood trees. A branch flew off of that was this big around and went about 40 feet on top of my second story. That was pretty bizarre, right? But I wouldn't want him to take down his beautiful trees for that. To me, that's just like a risk that you take, like the same thing as when you walk through the park. So trees fall, and we can't sort of predict all that. And so we have to live with some of that uncertainty, and I'm not sure how we can legislate that. And at this point, you've left that out, which I understand. So let's see. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Baker.
Thank you, Mayor Stone. And I add my thanks to staff for preparing this report and doing the work and bringing this back. I'm really happy that we're lifting up trees and talking about them now, because they are an enormous benefit to our city. I personally built my house around a tree where we literally cut out on the plans, moved a wall. I care deeply about our canopy. It's from a beauty, a mental health, and of course a climate perspective, all of which have been lifted up. And I echo those comments. But I do recall watching the 2022 meeting when this ordinance was adopted, and how even at the time it was like, well, let's try this, but maybe we went a little far. And that's of course why council asked for it to come back within a year, and we're talking about it now. Because we're concerned about unintended consequences. And, we've heard about some of those. Because in addition to the things I've mentioned, I just care about, I also care about resident safety and residents enjoying their own yards. And of course, having HCD certify our housing element. All of those things have to be balanced out. And I would argue that we, listening to resident concerns and trying to I was struck by what Ms. Ruskin said about wanting people, let's have more trees, but let's incentivize people to want to. I mean, that seems to me the ideal, is that we have more trees, but we have ones that people love having in their yard and love having in their neighbor's yard. And I think for that, we need some flexibility to replace what I would call trees of concern. And so that would be both the ones that you're worried about falling and the ones that are making your land, your house not enjoyable. And, I sat in on the Palo Alto Neighborhoods call the other night. Director Eggleston, thank you for presenting there, and our arborist, city arborist, thank you. And there were people talking about trees of a kind across the street, several which had fallen, and they still had one in their front yard standing of the same kind in the same area. Now, I think what I heard was that didn't necessarily fall under the right tree in the right place problem. And I'm wondering, Mr. Arborist, if you might give us a little more background on that. Because when I look at the staff report, it talks about, conditions of, physical conditions, which would seem to be pretty similar across the street from one another. So could you just tell us a little bit more about the right tree in the right place conditions? Because I thought I heard you say in response to Councilmember Burt's question that might also include use, but I don't see that in the staff report. So if you could elaborate, please.
So in relation to that specific example, I believe that those were actually street trees. So basically, if staff determines that the trees are hazardous or shows some sign of an issue, then we will put it on our removal and replacement list. We plan to continue to do that in those neighborhoods where we have aging trees, which is part of why we included the retrenchment in our new reasons for removal to account for people with those on private property that have reached the end of their useful lifespan, but may not technically be considered hazardous yet.
Right. And I think in this instance, they may not be quite to the state of retrenchment or completely at the end of of life, although they're mature and have been around. It's more the fact that 3 of them fell on their block of the same kind in the same place. And I'm just wondering if there's any flexibility if that implicates at all the right tree in the right place, even if it's not quite at the retrenchment stage.
It's possible that that could be that kind of an issue, but I think it's more likely that it is an end of useful lifespan for those particular trees in that particular street. But it could be applied to that as well.
Okay. Well, let me ask then a slightly different question, but also on the same general topic. One of the things we often hear a lot about are either sap dripping or infested trees that then you get sort of sticky substances from infested trees. When I looked at so to me, this seems like the public nuisance. You know, I want to enjoy my backyards, but my kids go out there, we're covered in sap and it's not fun. But I want trees, I'll plant twice as many trees, but perhaps I can't. You know, when I look at I think it was on slide 5, there's the changes to trees as public nuisance that is clarified. And it talks about the proposed text being clarified as to what types of infestations qualify, mentioning that they have to be included in the state's Department of Food and Agriculture's detection and eradication programs or be injurious to trees. Well, I'm not familiar with the Food and Agriculture's detection and eradication program. So could you give us a little bit of a real world feel for that? Would, you know, some of these aphids that cause the sticky substances, would those kinds of things typically qualify? And if not, could that be classified as the wrong tree in the wrong place if someone can't really include their backyard? So those are kind of two related questions.
Yes, and so the updates to the infestation are intended to capture infestations that are a threat to the entire urban forest. So these would be things like the emerald ash borer that may be coming down from Oregon soon, or the polyphagus shothole borer that could be coming up from Southern California, or some other new exotic pest that could be coming in that could be detrimental to our forest. As far as the issues associated with aphid infestation or tussock moths or things that aren't necessarily injurious to trees, but may be impacting your use of your property, that's where the right tree and the right place principles might come into effect. Again, when somebody's applying for removal, part of the process is that they submit an arborist report. So the arborist would make the case as to why the tree was inappropriately placed or the wrong tree in the wrong place. And so that would give us some ability to address these in a case-by-case basis.
Okay, great. So basically, impact on use of your property could be a factor in this right tree in the right place principles.
Correct. It could be used for that. I don't want to say all instances, but in situations like this, it is possibly that it could be applied there.
Okay. That's important because what I read about those principles was climate zone, soil type, rainfall, blah, blah, blah. So that's great. Okay. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Cook.
Thank you, Mayor Stone. Mr. Gollinger, on packet page 367, number 2, I just want to have clarification there with regards to the fact that, if I'm reading it correctly, that trees can only be removed under the state law if a court has ruled on in that situation. Not so much that anybody can use state law to come in and say they need a tree, they want the tree removed.
So this is just one portion of the public nuisance list. So the tree may not be considered a nuisance under our other code items, but if a court had deemed it a nuisance in a conflict between two residents, we would agree that it has been deemed a nuisance by that court.
Thank you, and thank you for that clarification. And as I was listening to my colleagues, again, it just seems really interesting how we're talking about sustainability and making sure climate change and we're addressing it and all that. But the one thing, our urban canopy trees, which is the most inexpensive and actually does not have a GHG footprint, is being one of the first things to be discussed about removal as soon as they find it inconvenient and that they can build. They want to use that space for building. It's also unfortunate that it is also characterized in writings that there's housing versus trees. That's just completely wrong. When we're talking about trees, it has fresh air, it sequesters, the mature trees are sequestering carbon, whereas producing a housing unit, there is a lot of GHG that's produced. So to characterize it, housing versus trees, is actually hyperbole. I'm very disappointed in that. The other thing I want to say is, as we go along, all of the first mantra or what cities are to do is to promote health and safety. And so, we're talking about nature. We're going to have emergencies. Nature will bring us winds, rain, storms, lightning, earthquakes, and it will be, and there will be trees that will come down, and there will be matters that happen. But when we're kind of like talking about this and saying that, don't just kind of look at it and just say that, what, we had a whole bunch of trees that came down, and just look at that. There is unusual situations, and there was unusual situation with the high winds and rains that we got, which we had not gotten many years. And so there will be trees that come down. But then the thing is, if you want to compare it to, I think somebody mentioned cars, but I want to compare it to electric vehicles. There's been instances when electric vehicles has exploded and fire had happened, some on the road, some at their homes and garages or in their garages. So are we going to get rid of all the electrical vehicles now? So, let's talk about with some reality here. I also want to say that when we're doing designs for ADUs and stuff, I do have concerns, that we're actually providing so much exemptions for ADU building. And I would hope that we are also encouraging adaptive designs to preserve trees as they are designing their ADUs and the placement and so forth, so that the tree is thought about being saved before nothing else is looked at. So I see nod, and I'm very grateful for that. So I do also appreciate that members of the public did bring in facts versus just dispensing misinformation. So thank you. And if Mayor Stone, if you're ready, I would like to make a motion unless somebody has already indicated that they're making a motion. Or when you're ready to take a motion.
If you'd like to make a motion now, go ahead.
Right, so I'd like to move the staff's recommendation, including the changes to the the language in Title 8 update, change to 8.10.070.
Anything else to add to the motion?
Maybe the municipal fee, update the municipal fee.
I think that's included. So, okay, so you're moving the staff motion along with what was included in the staff presentation? Great. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
I don't have
Councilmember Cooge, like
anything.
to speak to your motion?
I think I've said most of what I wanted to say already. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Lowry?
I just want to say this is a continuing work in progress. So this isn't the last time we're going to vote on this. And again, I really appreciate staff's efforts to date and want more just like it. We do need a mixture of housing and trees, and we need to have some flexibility. So thank you.
Thank you. Since I haven't had a chance, I just have two questions and then a few comments to regarding the motion. Just a couple of things I wanted some clarity on regarding the discretionary removal for large projects as a new reason to remove protected trees. The proposed language requires a net tree canopy increase on the property within 15 years. I'm just confused by that requirement, whether that means the new trees simply need to be replanted within 15 years or the canopy itself needs to be within 15 years, essentially what was lost at the time.
So that would be the canopy itself. And this is an existing policy that we've been enforcing for a no net loss of canopy that's included in the, I believe it's the Urban Forest Master Plan and the Sustainability Plan. So it's something that we've been using on planning entitlement projects for many years. And so we're choosing to include this here.
Great. And just out of curiosity, how does that get tracked? I mean, 15 years is a long time. Sometimes we have difficulty in this city enforcing much easier code enforcement issues. How do we track that and enforce that?
What is done is during the design phase, there's a calculation that you can use based on the species or the size type to estimate what the tree canopy would be in 15 years. And if the tree replacement ratio matches up, then the project would be approved. Those trees are then protected once they're planted. So we currently don't go back and double check these, but we now have the capability to do so with a new canopy module tool that goes to the parcel level. And we get updates every 2 years on that. But we don't have anything in place yet to actually physically track those, but we could implement that in the future.
Great, thank you. My next question regarding the 25% rule for new single family homes. Who bears the burden of proving that there's no financially feasible design alternatives, which would then permit preservation of the tree?
So typically that would be the responsibility of the applicant and the builder. So in reality, what's happened when we've approached these is we have a site meeting with a city arborist, the project arborist, and the project either designer or manager, and we discuss what other options there might be. Generally, there's reasons those other options wouldn't be feasible, and so we haven't had to actually go to the calculation. But if they were to, they would have to estimate the cost and base it as a percentage of the project valuation, which is included in their application.
And then just going to follow up to this, how does that 25% rule apply to ADUs and JADUs? I understand this ordinance does not apply if it's under 800 square feet, which 90% of our ADUs. But if it's larger than that, is that new then ADU or JADU included within the 25% rule?
So it would be for the whole buildable area of the lot.
So it would be included.
Yeah, but the tree would have to take up not just the buildable area of where the ADU is going, but of the buildable area on the whole lot.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I support the motion. One thing I did want to kind of address that has been mentioned here tonight regarding last year's New Year's Eve storms, and it's really not a storm, it was storms. I think it really was an exceptional event. And while I agree significant storm events are definitely going to become more common with climate change, that doesn't discount the fact that those storms were incredibly severe. This past year, I've been serving on the San Francisco Creek JPA. we studied those storms quite closely because, of course, the impacts on the flooding of the creek on our neighborhoods, and just as kind of a reminder of how exceptional that storm was. From late December through mid-January, we had six storm systems that included a narrow, cold frontal rain bands, atmospheric rivers, and a rare low-pressure center that underwent a bomb cyclogenesis. I don't even know what a cyclogenesis is, but I know it's not good. It's a serious storm. That's not a normal event, and I completely agree with the executive director of Canopy and appreciate him coming here tonight, who supports these recommendations. We have our nonprofit tree organization here tonight saying, yes, these recommendations are good. And I believe he made the point that it is premature to contemplate additional changes at this time. I think that's absolutely true. We're really just kind of a year into this. And one thing at least we all are agreeing on is the increased severity of weather events that we are going to see from climate change. We're hearing that from both proponents and opponents to this ordinance. But there are other consequences of storms that we are going to see, like we saw from last year's storm. We're going to see continued flood risks associated with high rainfall and creek flooding. And I think an interesting data point, the U.S. Forest Service estimates that 100 mature trees catch about 139 gallons of rainwater each year. That is a critical tool in fighting these storm events that we all agree are going to continue to happen. And then beyond storms, we're also going to see higher temperatures, more deadly heat waves. And according to the Nature Conservancy, trees along city streets can cool these streets by up to 4 degrees. And this is just a sampling of benefits that trees are going to offer us in the fight against climate change. Councilmember Koo also talked about the sequestration impact. So we've all talked about climate change. Obviously, trees are not the only solution, but it is a tool to that tool chest. And we've talked so much on SCAP about how difficult it's going to be to really be able to kind of close some of this gap to be able to reach that 80 by 30 goal. Shouldn't be removing, I know we're not discussing removing trees, but we should not be weakening this ordinance. I do think this ordinance is making a lot of changes that are necessary. There are several flaws, and I'm glad to see we're going to be going back to PTC. We're going to be going back to parks to continue to discuss ways that we can improve it. But I think where we're at right now for tonight, I support. So those are my comments. We'll move to Councilmember Tanaka.
Thank you, staff, and thank you for members of the public coming out to speak on this topic. I think it's really important. One of the big reasons why I moved here is because of the trees. My property actually has a lot of trees around there, and this is one of the things I think makes the city really, really nice. But with that said, I guess my concern about the proposed motion on the floor is I didn't see a lot of things in here to help streamline some things that made the headlines, like the falling trees. And we could debate whether these are extreme or not extreme, but I believe the number one duty of a city is to make sure that people feel safe, right? The property and people should be a priority for us. And so, I see an increase of penalties. I see a lot of other things in here, but I don't see how this is going to prevent some of the issues that we saw where some people, their houses got damaged. Some people could have been seriously injured. I don't see provisions in there to actually help prevent that. And so I'm very concerned about what's currently on the floor. I don't know if I could support this as it's written, because I don't see enough things in here to prevent some of the issues that we saw last year, whether it's exceptional or not. And so I, for one, probably will not support this motion.
Councilmember Burt.
Thank you. I just had a few other questions and comments. So first, we've had a lot of discussion about this last year and the extreme weather events, particularly extreme winds. They were some of the highest winds that we've had in many decades, but it doesn't mean we won't have a recurrence of those sorts of events. But we didn't talk much about the preceding years, which were ones of drought. And I don't want to go deeply into that this evening, but we quickly have forgotten that in those years, we were very concerned with a lot of trees that were becoming weakened and dying as a result of the drought, even on our own properties like the hidden forest behind the Rinconada Pool. We had a whole series of redwoods that had to be removed. But in their place, it created growth opportunity for the remaining trees as well. And I bring this up in that it's part of the right tree. We've planted a lot of trees here that are extremely water intensive that would never grow in a natural habitat here. And that's one of the reasons that I was glad to see on top of page 7, an emphasis within that context of the right tree and right place principles, discussion about native woodlands and riparian landscapes and having the right trees in those areas. And I think it would be very helpful if we can have some opportunities to have greater education about our natural habitat, not the habitat we have created in modern times here, but what is the natural habitat and what are the trees and plants that are drought tolerant because they've evolved to be able to live in this environment. And I think that's where, when we talk about an ecosystem of everything from other plants that live within that environment to insects and birds and the entire natural community, they depend on one another and work in a natural environment in a way that they don't work the same in when we create a different environment. That doesn't mean we're going to be able to restore that, but it's something that we should be conscious of. And when we talk about natural environment, that's the foremost thing that we should be looking at, is the true ecosystem here. I did want to ask, though, and this related to the drought issues, in our open space area, we have just innumerable trees that in a drought period become dying and are real threats for wildland fires. Is there anything in here that addresses the open space property owner needs to be able to remove dead or dying trees that they're not irrigating like we do down in the flats?
I think anything that would be fire hazard related would be covered in the fire code. I believe that they are required to have defensible space, which could preclude this. I think we referenced that in the 22 updates, that anytime this is in conflict with fire requirements, fire would take precedence.
Well, I'll just say that that could very well be the case when we have this come back to us next time. I think that would be an important subcategory for us to make sure we're really thinking through that tension there. And I'll emphasize that if we have a mega fire, we lose all this canopy in the not only in the wildland, but potentially into the urban wildland interface. It is potentially catastrophic. So the best way to preserve that bulk of the canopy and our incredible wildlands is to recognize the impacts of climate change that are already upon us and figure out how we can most effectively prevent catastrophic wildfires.
And just to be aware, one of the biggest species up there that's a fire hazard are the eucalyptus, and they are exempt. So they could be removed at any time.
And thank you. Lastly, I just wanted to commend that, Peter, that you had spoken a few times about kind of the tree life cycles and the lifespans, because that's another thing that we need to recognize is, as we've created over the last century or so, a huge urban forest land, we start thinking that every one of the trees that we've planted over that time will live indefinitely. And many of these species are not designed to naturally live for the same period of time as native oaks and otherwise. And that's part of this education process that I think we need to recognize, that there's a natural evolution in the canopy. It's not just preserving what we have, it is replacing and continuing to rejuvenate it that we do. So thank you.
Councilmember Vinker.
Thank you, Mayor Stone. Picking up on comments from the public, but also from my colleagues, some of the comments Councilmember Burt just made and earlier Councilmember Lithcott-Hames. I am interested in, especially since this will be sort of an ongoing conversation with this issue going back to a couple of our commissions. I am interested in hearing certain proposals to educate our residents in ways that Councilmember Burt just talked about our ecosystem and canopy maintenance, but also to incentivize residents to maintain and increase our canopy, including in ways that are compatible with development, because we are going to see development. We have to build 6,000 plus housing units. And I think trying to discern that is important. So what I'm wondering is whether the maker and the seconder of the motion might be interested in adding a little C that would say, ask staff to come back with proposals to educate and incentivize residents to maintain and increase our canopy, including in ways compatible with development.
I don't see a reason not to. I mean, Mr. Gollinger, Brad, Mr. Eggleston. You do have education.
The educate part seems very clear and in line with efforts actually that are already underway. I guess I'm a little bit unclear what the incentivize might pertain to in particular.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking is that we didn't hear a lot. And so I'm thinking it probably takes a little more reflection and thought on and study on staff's part as to what might get our residents to not want to cut down their trees and or maybe willful indifference on the driveway that surrounds. But people, are there things that would make them plant a couple extra or do things that maintain and increase our canopy? I don't know exactly what they are, but I'm not an expert. And I was hoping that, in this idea of instead of having it be a tension of sort of housing versus canopy, if we got people, we're proud of our canopy here in Palo Alto. So are there incentives that would make sense for us to offer? You may come back and say no, but I'm thinking you'll come back with some. So that was what I wanted to ask, is that could be investigated.
I don't see why not. I guess there's already on the way with the education, as Mr. Eggleston said. If you explore that, and I think it still goes to PTC and PRC for that exploration as well. Thank you.
If I might suggest that perhaps rather than having this be a research assignment from staff, it's actually an invitation for the community as you engage in the follow-up work through both our commissions, that if community members have suggestions on what might create that incentive, that would be something that we could compile and bring back.
And I'm sure we can engage with Canopy as well. They've been our longtime advisors and overseers of our canopy. But it would be specifically to maintain and increase our canopy. So making sure that our existing mature trees are maintained and preserved. Council, done.
Yeah, when you say incentives, that sounds like money to me. So I'm not sure where we're going to get that in budgeting. I've often thought as I watered my trees on the parkway that how come this is my job? But it is. And I actually had one last comment I was going to make, which is ties right into what Councilmember Baker is saying here, is that, you know, it is our responsibility as homeowners, not just what it says in 810-070 owners of property, but also the parkways that are out there with the property. And residents really need a lot of knowledge of this. I think maybe that's part of what Councilmember Vinker is also saying, is that, you know, they need to know what the sort of the current rules are. And so that happens. But if there's a way that somehow we can get people excited about putting in more trees, maybe there is some incentive. I don't know. So
Perhaps there's some in-kind incentive. I think it's something that we just ought to think about a little more, especially as we're looking at having, you know, increased development and things. And because I see this conversation as one that'll come back. And I'm trying to get creative about ways that can kind of be a win-win. So that last word should be development, compatible with development.
my only other comment was, since staff is going to engage with the two commissions, doesn't that mean the community by definition?
Whom are you asking?
Yeah, I would say that I don't think this is absolutely essential for the commissions to go and look at it, but I'm trying to be accommodating, but so I wouldn't rule it out. So I would accept it.
Mayor, if I might comment to the discussion ongoing, I think staff has just clarified for me that the follow-up work is anticipated to go to the PTC only. So the PRC, I believe, is not expected to be involved in this next round of follow-up. So I would hope that the PTC is sufficient venue for the discussion to continue and bring back to the council.
Okay, great. That has been incorporated into the motion. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to be clear on the record. I'm not at all saying that it should be a competition between housing and canopy. I'm saying both are valued, and I would never want one to be sort of pursued in a way that harms the other when we can continue to plant more trees. I have a redwood tree in my yard that I look at when I write my books, so I'm a tree person. I am, however, inclined not to support the motion, and it's really because of the issues raised by Ms. Russin. And I think I've been mispronouncing your last name, so I apologize. Okay. I'm worried that our ordinance binds property owners in a way that feels too controlling and transfers risk to them that I'm just not comfortable with, which is why I'm much more in favor of allowing people to replace on a 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1 basis, or perhaps there are other mechanisms we could put in place to ensure the canopy is not just preserved, but built out even more while allowing homeowners, property owners to do what they need to do. To Ms. Russin's point about risk, I am concerned that a homeowner who senses something is wrong with a tree, who approaches the city, is told to engage a certified arborist who disagrees, and then the tree falls into the house and comes within feet, or was it inches if you and your toddler, potentially harming the resident. I'm concerned that when that happens, neither the city nor the arborist is bearing any responsibility for that potentially tragic outcome. And so I find myself worrying, how do we prevent a property owner from doing what they feel is best for their lot, their family, and yet not take on responsibility if a tragedy ensues? I guess in short, I'm concerned that we're transferring potentially significant, unquantifiable in advance risk to homeowners. It just makes me feel quite uncomfortable. So again, I am far more in favor of allowing somebody like Ms. Russin to do what she felt she needed to do, with the requirement that she replace that tree with perhaps 2 or even 3 others. So for that reason, I am inclined not to support the motion.
Thank you. And seeing no other lights or hands raised, then Madam Clerk, can you take the vote?
Vice Mayor Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
No.
Councilmember Ku,
Yes.
Councilmember Vinker,
Yes.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott Hames,
No.
Mayor Stone.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-2.
Mayor Stone,
Yes,
may I just make a comment to staff before they leave?
please, go ahead.
I just want to thank staff as well as PTC and PRC for all the work that they did on updating this ordinance, as well as looking at the refinements. And also, Mr. Gollinger and Mr. Hernandez, I have read some of the emails from a resident here in Palo Alto, and I appreciate all your work and apologize for the abuse that you've been taking. So thank you again.
That will bring us to action item 14, but we skipped our break earlier. Seems like a good time to be able to take it. So let's take a 10-minute break, and we will be back then at 7:55 to take on our last action item, item number 14. take their seats.
Wait for a break. Break.
All right, we'll come back from our break now, and we will be addressing our last action item of the evening, item 14, approval of a substation improvement agreement with Tesla Incorporated to install improvements and reserve capacity at Hanover Substation. I believe we have a staff presentation. Great, thank you.
We do. Good evening, Mayor Stone, council members, Dean Batchelor, Director of Utilities. I have with me Mohammed Fatah, who is our engineering manager from Electric. And also Patrick Bean is on Zoom. He is the director in charge of the charging and energy policy and business development from Tesla. So we'll be able to answer your questions during this presentation. But before we go into the presentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, just real quickly, about a little bit about this background of this project. So as everybody is aware from council, is that Tesla's moving its engineering headquarters to the former HP headquarters, where they're performing advanced research and development to support their vehicles and products it produces. The city is proposing to rebuild the existing Hanover substation to replace the existing substation facilities, which is nearing the end of its lifeful use, and to accommodate Tesla's power increases needs and improving the design installed by Tesla. So the best way to meet these needs is to work with Tesla. We're partnering with a public-private partnership that's beginning to postpone or propose and will be implemented through the Substation Improvement Agreement, SIA, including an associated encroachment permit. Staff has determined that it's coming to the end of life of these transformers that we need to replace. This project would have happened at a later date. We would have had to replace these due to the grid mod. There are 2 transformers out there that are 4 kV transformers, and it's serving portion of where this new Tesla project will be at, as well as the surrounding area of the rest of the business corridor up there. And these transformers are getting in the range of about 50 years old, and they're not having the capacity as we're seeing increases in that area. So no matter what, this project would have moved forward. It probably would have moved forward a little later than what we're asking for tonight. As you saw in the report, we're looking to actually turn up this project by April of 2024 to getting power to Tesla and all the upgrades in the substation areas with replacing these transformers, some switches that we'll be doing, and then also replacing some feeder lines that need to come out of there to be upgraded. One thing that is also happening with this is that there are definitely benefits, no risks to the city with this, having this agreement in place with Tesla. There are positive things to the city from a financial standpoint. As you read in the report, it's a split of this $24 million. $3 million of it is 100% to the city. So our portion of the payment is $15 million of this project. So there are financial advances in this, as well as to the ratepayers with this partnership that we're working with Tesla on this. As you read also through the report, you saw that there were some other advantages just around the timing or just around grid mod that we're trying to get through with this. And this substation will be the first to be able to move in that direction once we start building up in that area. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Patrick from our Tesla partnership. We think that this is going to be a really good partnership with Tesla. And we believe that there is no risk to the city by doing this, because if we were going to do this probably on our own, we estimated that we would be spending somewhere between $18 and $20 million. The city would have to fund itself. By this, we're saving about $5 to $6 million in the cost with this partnership. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. Patrick, are you online?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Dean, and good evening, council members. My name is Patrick Bean, Dean mentioned, Director of Charging and Energy Policy and Business Development at Tesla. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss the public-private partnership. Over the last 18 months, we've been working closely with the City of Palo Alto utility staff and city attorneys to figure out a mutually beneficial way to increase the local grid capacity. So I want to thank the City of Palo Alto utilities for their great partnership on the development of the proposal. We're very excited about the partnership and the ability to expand our presence in Palo Alto. Last year, we reaffirmed our commitment to California and Palo Alto by announcing our new engineering headquarters on Page Mill Road and Hanover Street. Palo Alto is where we develop, test, validate many of our new products. We have over $150 million in planned investments and equipment for that engineering headquarters. Upgrading the substation will help us accelerate that investment and our new product development. The existing substation, as Dean mentioned, is near the end of its useful life, and the area is in desperate need for new capacity. So by taking on half of the project costs as Tesla and 100% of the cost expedite, we ultimately think this is better for the community because we can bring it in at a lower cost than would have otherwise occurred in the future. And that additional capacity is something that is available for other companies and customers to use. And we believe that availability of the capacity will help drive further investment in Palo Alto, just like what we as Tesla are doing. So we think it's a win-win for the community and Tesla. And again, want to thank you all for the opportunity to discuss the project. And I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
So with that, we have a short presentation that we'd like to do. So I'm going to turn it over to Mohammed.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, council members. Next slide, please. So real quick, just to give you a feel for proximity of the Tesla facility, it's adjacent to the substation. You can see the substation down at the bottom right there. And Tesla has acquired and moved into the previous HP headquarters at 1501 Page Mill Road there as well. Off to the right, you'll see a news clipping of describing the work that Tesla is planning to promote there in Palo Alto there as well. And we're very proud, obviously, to be in support of their efforts there with all the electricity needs that they'll need there as well. Next slide, please. Essentially, the Hanover substation has been in existence there for over 50 years there as well. It's been supporting the business sector there in Palo Alto for that many years there as well. The 4 kV system has been retired and those transformers have been moved out. There's a significant amount of space that will accommodate, of course, the new equipment that's going in place there as well. The work entails grading and removing some of the existing pad mounts or concrete pads and lattice work that's in there to install actually 360 kV circuit breakers, 2 on line and 1 as a bus tie breaker there as well. And then 250 MVA transformers, which will provide enough capacity for the foreseeable future, of course, for any of the existing Tesla demand, as well as new demand that we're anticipating will come as a result of grid mod there as well. This will also install a new 12 kV power distribution center, which will look as if it's a new control center within the area of the substation there as well. And the work that Tesla will do is we will be feeding them high voltage 12 kV. So they will build the feeders from their data center, which is across the property line there, directly back into the City of Palo Alto Hanover substation there as well. We'll install the bus work, the wiring, feeders, and the connection into the Tesla site there as well. And then we'll go through the effort of testing and commissioning all the equipment and putting it in service. Next slide, please. Here's a high-level timeline. We are at City Council here on the 16th with the anticipation that the contracts will be signed. Tesla anticipates they'll break ground on January 29, and they'll move very quickly to establish all of the necessary pieces and parts to build the electric distribution system with an anticipated turn-up date of September 17. Next slide, please. I apologize, that table slipped down to the bottom there as well. I think Patrick talked through and Dean talked through the public-private partnership there as well. The initial project funding, Tesla will provide the initial funding. The reason why we're going through this effort here is because if the city were to embark on this effort here, it'll take us over a year to acquire all the equipment and do all the design and construction work there as well. So there's a huge benefit, of course, of working directly with Tesla on this here as well. Total project cost is estimated to be 24 million, including the construction cost of 15 million. The city's reimbursement to Tesla will be 50% of the construction to a maximum of 12 million, and that is the cap for the project on the part of the city. Tesla will construct the feeders that I summarized earlier here between the substation and the Tesla headquarters there on Page Mill Road there as well. City's cost will be 12 kV extension from the transformers to the new transformers in the site itself. Next slide, please. So in summary, the city and Tesla have entered an improvement agreement in which the parties will jointly design, construct, install, and fund the improvements to increase the electrical capacity at Hanover Substation at 1501 Page Mill Road there as well. 3 contract documents will have been negotiated. Substation improvement agreement, which establishes the public-private partnership. The second agreement is an encroachment permit, which allows the Tesla team and Tesla contractors to perform work at the Hanover Substation site. And then the last contract is the capacity reservation agreement, in which the city reserves 11.2 MVA of power for Tesla. Tesla pays a monthly capacity reservation fee to hold that 11.2 MVA, and then they receive a monthly capacity usage credit to compensate them for their investment of the equipment and the transformers there. Next slide, please. Staff requests council's approval of the substation improvement agreement with Tesla to install improvements and reserve capacity at the Hanover Substation, and approve a fiscal year 2024 budget amendment in the electric fund to allocate 15 million to the Hanover Substation upgrade project. Next slide, please. That's it. Okay. Any questions of council?
So that's the end of the presentation? Okay, wonderful, thank you. We'll turn it over to Councilmember Vinker for needs to make a recusal.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Stone. So while it didn't come up in these presentations, at the end of the staff report, you'll note that it says that this project is located on Stanford lands. So while it seems pretty attenuated and to me, but the conflicts rules of the FPPC are much broader than the ones I'm accustomed to in the federal court. So after consulting with our city attorney, I will recuse myself from this item because I do represent Stanford in patent matters. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Vinker. Then we will go to public comment before coming back to council for discussion.
We have one request to speak. Our first speaker is Sunita DT.
Evening, council members. So I got here before the break, and maybe it's because I'm the daughter of an electrical engineer, and I was reading the newspaper and hearing about this deal and thought I had a couple of concerns and questions. And during the break, I met a fellow Canadian, Andy, over there, and we had a little chat, and I asked him a bunch of questions along with Greg. And all my questions are resolved. And so I don't really have any concerns. It sounds like basically once this deal is done and the work is done and the upgrade has happened, then it's still CPAU that's operating as usual and no more involvement with Tesla. So that was my main concern. So thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. No further public comment. Then we'll bring it back to the dais. Councilmember Ku.
Thank you. It does sound like a very good deal, and it will get the substation going. Now, this substation is located at SRP, Stanford Research Park, and can we kind of talk about the lease? Is that something that is ongoing? So we have a long-term lease, or is that something that we should be aware of?
Well, in terms of the city's lease with, or city's use of the property, perhaps a better description, with the Stanford University, that's actually an ongoing conversation and one that we'll hopefully be bringing back to the city council in the near future.
The reason I asked the question is because we're moving forward on upgrading this substation. Tesla is a tenant of Stanford Research Park, so obviously it benefits Stanford Research Park greatly. I think I would also like to find out, so Tesla will get their amount of electricity from power from this substation. Is there other sites that is at Stanford Research Park that would be receiving power from the substation?
I can't give you the exact addresses, but that whole area up there in that research park on Hanover and all through that area, they all come off of this substation.
Yes.
So it's all the business park customers that we have in that area.
Thank you. I kind of suspected that, which is why, again, it's a benefit for Stanford Research Park greatly for their tenants, right? So in a way, I think that Stanford should be participating in this discussion or in coming to a conclusion of this substation so that it can move forward. And I think that not having a conclusion on the lease potentially is not beneficial for the city of Palo Alto or for their tenants. So I think that coming to a conclusion sooner than later would be what I would like to see. And that is my only kind of hesitation on moving forward with this if we don't have a conclusion to the lease discussions with Stanford Research Park. Thank you, Mayor Stone.
Thank you. Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, so wanted to thank members of the public for coming out, staff, Tesla. As you guys probably know, on city council, I really look for a good deal, and I like good deals, and this one seems like it's a good deal. It's I looked at it many different ways, and it seems like something we have to build, we want to build. We have someone that's willing to help pay for it, which is awesome. So many different ways I looked at it. It looks like a pretty awesome deal for everyone involved here. So I want to move forward. I'll make a motion to move forward on the staff recommendation. I was wondering if I could get a second.
Second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I just did. Thank you.
Councilmember Lithcott-Ames.
I'll just add that I appreciate the staff presentation and that of Tesla, and appreciate that we saved $5 or $6 million by doing this public-private partnership, which is, if I understood that correctly, and obviously that's to the benefit of the city. Thank you.
Seeing no other lights, the clerk can take the vote.
Councilmember Burt,
Yes.
Councilmember Ku,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Lowing,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott-Ames,
Yes.
Mayor Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Councilmember Vinker recused.
Wonderful. That takes care of all of our action items. And with that, we are adjourned about 20 minutes early. Well done.
Don't you have